You are listening to the US of NA, a series of stories about the founders and innovators shaping the non-alcoholic movement from every corner of the country and beyond. For a full library of episodes, go to usofna.com or make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Are you a brand looking to find enthusiasts nationwide to collaborate with and get liquid to lips? Or are you a fan of NA beverages open to sharing free samples with your run club or community group, or maybe getting paid to do in-store samplings? Then sign up at irlnation.com, the industry's first platform aimed at creating in-real-life partnerships in the category. Again, that's irlnation.com.
Everything changed with this rise of hemp and with this conversion process where you're taking hemp-derived CBD and mutating it into Delta-9 THC. With doing that, suddenly we were able to create a federally legal option where you could sell in your local supermarket or liquor store to consumers who are curious. And it's like, okay, 2.5 milligrams of THC. I don't know what that means, but I'm going to buy one and take it home. And it has had a profound impact on this market.
Hello, and welcome to the US of NA. I'm your host, Chief Optimist John Eggleton. That was today's guest, Ricardo Baca, that you just heard from, talking about how the hemp-derived THC category has been a game changer for cannabis overall, which we'll get into in our discussion. Ricardo is the founder-CEO of Colorado-based Grasslands, an integrated marketing and PR agency with a large client roster of cannabis clients. So why are we talking to the leader of a marketing company in this episode? A former newspaper journalist who was one of the first ever to cover cannabis, helping it establish legitimacy in those early days, Ricardo has had a significant behind-the-scenes impact on the regulated commercial market from the beginning. In fact, in 2016, Fortune called him one of the 7 most powerful people in America's marijuana industry. In our conversation, Ricardo talks about how his journalism work helped educate the mainstream on cannabis. He explains where we are in the current universe where the industry is essentially split into 2 factions, what Politico has called its civil war. We also touch on what he's hearing on legislation at the federal level and how that may or may not impact the THC beverage category that's taking off. Lastly, we talk about the future and how the industry has really become one with the broader health and wellness movement that has shaped more mindful drinking habits. Here's our interview. All right. Ricardo Baca is a 20-year veteran journalist and cannabis futurist who was appointed the Denver Post's first ever cannabis editor in 2013 and later founded news vertical The Cannabis. In 2016, he launched Grasslands, a journalism-minded agency to work directly with business leaders in highly regulated industries, from cannabis and psychedelics to spirits and healthcare. Appointed by Colorado Governor Jared Polis, Ricardo serves on the state's first ever Natural Medicine Advisory Board and has also been named one of Fortune's 7 most powerful people in America's marijuana industry. So, Ricardo, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to the US of NA.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It's great to meet you. And yeah, listen to multiple episodes. You're doing great work. It's great to be here.
No, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And we've really been excited to have this conversation with someone with your background and expertise. It's such an interesting time, as we'll get into in the category, and a lot of sort of confusing elements out there that would love to talk through with you. I think to kick things off, I know you started your career in journalism. You're one of the earliest voices really for the cannabis space. That's a thread that I know continues through your work at Grasslands. So tell us about how you got into that in the first place, and how would you view what you and your team are doing there at Grasslands as sort of continuing that mission?
Yeah, of course. I got into journalism because I really was always interested in reading and writing, way more so than math and science. So that's the kind of kid I was. I found my way to the high school newspaper, college newspaper, and then I declared the major, got a great scholarship and some awesome opportunities. So I loved that career, 24 years and working for daily newspapers. What an awesome trip. But I think one thing I learned there very quickly was that the craft of modern public relations left a lot to be desired. This is PR. This is securing clients' earned media. And of course, how PR professionals do that is by pitching journalists, developing those relationships, saying, hey, journalists, I think you'll really like this. I know you write about this beat. Here's a relevant narrative in that beat. So I had an inside track into why PR had lost its way from being that journalist for 24 years who was getting pitched. And I came up with an idea for a different kind of PR agency. And that's really what we do at Grasslands every day, I think most PR professionals have forgot about these important dynamics that they have between their journalist partners, but also between their clients. And with Grasslands, we take a journalism-minded approach to make sure that we're always celebrating and prioritizing our partnership with journalists, just trying to be the best partners possible to them, to anticipate their needs before they have to ask us. And then on the flip side, we love just clearly communicating extremely directly with our clients. So that's how kind of journalism infused itself into this business. And yeah, Grasslands turned 8 years old last month. We're a small team of about 22 full-timers, headquartered in Denver, but have colleagues in LA, New York, and elsewhere.
So let's talk about the legislative level a little bit. I know you're involved. We mentioned at the top you're on the advisory board appointed by the governor. For our listeners, can you explain in your words, really, what's happening in the market today with these sort of two sides, even though that it's all the same plant? You have the hemp-derived side, which was created as a result of the 2018 Farm Bill, and then the regulated marijuana cannabis marketplace as well. One of those being legal in, I think, roughly half the states, whereas hemp-derived is federally legal. So can you talk about that, or just kind of give how would you explain that in your words?
I know you nailed it, John. If we go back 2 years, there were these two distinct markets, right? Because you had a regulated cannabis market that was regulated at the state level. But you also had this growing hemp market that had been legalized through the Farm Bill years ago. And that Farm Bill is a doctrine at the federal level. So they were always pretty separate, in part because most of the hemp products were non-intoxicating. We're talking about, of course, CBD. But then, of course, something happened in the last 3 years where suddenly we are seeing hemp Delta 8 THC products coming out, and they had an intoxicating effect. Since then, some clever entrepreneurs and scientists out there figured out a way to transition hemp CBD, which is non-intoxicating, into Delta 9 THC, which is very much intoxicating, and it's the same chemical component, the same natural aspect that you find in traditional cannabis that gives you that high, but also that gives you the medical efficacy for pain relief and for seizure cessation and for some of these other things that cannabis has become widely and broadly accepted for, even by organizations as stringent as the Journal of the American Medical Association or the National Academies for Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Both JAMA and the National Academies are out there saying cannabis is medicine for these limited conditions, including chronic pain and others. So what you're seeing now is a hemp and a cannabis market that look a lot alike, because no longer is hemp the non-intoxicating side of weed. You can get intoxicating hemp products. You buy them e-commerce in Shopify. They deliver to your door in most states. And now it's created a dynamic that's full of tension between that state-regulated market where you're going in and buying in a dispensary and the federally legal cannabis market where you're going into Total Wine or your neighborhood liquor store and buying a can or a bottle of an intoxicating hemp beverage. So we are at the crossroads of this right now. In fact, Politico called this a civil war last year. And I think that speaks to how tumultuous this has become on both sides of the equation.
No, it definitely is very interesting, and maybe about to get even more interesting. I know Congress, once they get past the inauguration and the new regime and everything, are expected to put through a new farm bill. I believe it was supposed to be signed last year. It was just one of the things that got kicked down the road. And so, are you hearing anything in terms of, what that might look like? And, there's been talk of whether they would close that loophole, which obviously, this whole new industry has sort of been born out of that. And anything that you're hearing on that so far?
What I have heard, and this is all just the word on the street, right? But from my friends who are the most connected in DC, and they're taking place in these conversations at really high level with U.S. congressmen and women, we are hearing that loophole is very unlikely to close, that this intoxicating hemp market will still have a platform to go out and thrive and to do all the things that the state regulated cannabis market wants to. How these two factions end up coming together. In my mind, I don't know how it happens, but I also know that it is inevitable and we very much need it to happen because, in Politico terms, they're calling this a civil war. Technically, it's a civil war of the same plant, cannabis and hemp. It is really quite challenging, but from what I'm hearing, we're going to continue to see this intoxicating hemp market proliferate, which has so many positive side effects when you think about it too. I mean, not only are we seeing the true renaissance of an NA market with such beautiful products and craft beverages out there, but now you throw hemp in the mix, and they are next to those NA and alcoholic alternatives in Total Wine and liquor stores and supermarkets. And it's just adding a new intoxicant to the mix, which is deeply fascinating because previously, to get intoxicating THC, you had to walk into a dispensary and be very deliberate about it. And now this is all about human beings. As adults, we're generally pretty lazy with our shopping patterns. We have this place, we go for our groceries, where we go for our alcohol, and if we consume cannabis, where we go for our cannabis. And now when you're shopping for, picking up some turkey and cheese for your sandwich tomorrow morning, or you're picking up a bottle of wine for tonight, you are coming face to face with the opportunity of, oh, wow, here's a Keef Cola, or here is a Fable. These delightful beverages that will take the edge off, but do not contain alcohol. And it's ultimately about meeting the consumer where they are, right? It's kind of a foundational marketing principle. And now we are seeing hemp is meeting that consumer where they are. And with that, we're seeing a changing demographic of more cannabis consumers becoming young women over young men, which is a huge transition that has literally never happened in the existence of the regulated market, and predating that in the illicit market. It was always guys that were consuming more than women, but we are seeing that slowly start to change. It's a really powerful pattern of normalization, which I reported on extensively as a journalist, and we talk about every day here at Grasslands with our clients because, of course, the more normalized it is to consume cannabis, the more familiar and the more comfortable people are to pick up that beverage and say, okay, I'm going to try this 2.5 milligram beverage. I'm just going to try one and see how it goes.
You're right. Yeah, just the venue in which you can buy these products. There's a lot of friction involved with walking into a dispensary. It's kind of a special trip. Whereas if you're already in the liquor store aisle, or you're already in the, like you said, Total Wine, it's showing up in a lot of new places. Gas stations, which here in the Southeast, you've seen it a lot in those places as well. It makes it just easier to pick up and consider, and that I'm sure has great impacts in terms of just perceptions and really just, sampling and, people who are engaging with the product and the category that may never have before. So very, very interesting stuff there for sure. Let's talk, while we're talking about the legislative side, there's the rescheduling of marijuana, which has been, a discussion and a process, and, continues to be, I think, delayed is the last that we heard on that. And just for everybody listening, so marijuana is currently, and check me on this, Ricardo, if I get any of this wrong, but it's currently classified as a class 1 substance, which basically puts it on parity with things like heroin. In terms of its perceived risk to the population. And there's some definite negative impacts of that for anybody who's in the cannabis industry. And, one of those, or chief among those, would be a lot of tax breaks that just aren't available to those who engage or involved in the cannabis industry. But there's obviously some others as well. So there would be great advantage to that being reclassified as I think class 3 is what's being discussed. So any thoughts on that you would add to that, Ricardo? And in terms of how optimistic are you that will get passed? And, if and when it does, what impact might that have on the industry as a whole, do you think?
This is, it is seriously the biggest roadblock in the face of legalization of any kind, regardless of if you're talking about hemp or cannabis. To have cannabis scheduled as a Schedule 1 substance it's absurd, it's ridiculous, it's embarrassing. So really what the options are at that point are rescheduling, which is an initiative that was started by the Biden administration. And now we're hoping that the Trump administration will continue that work. And as you said, that is moving it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. That would have significant benefits to the industry. It would be huge. technically it would be the largest shift in drug policy in this country in my lifetime, in our lifetime. So that's kind of what that looks like if we were to reschedule cannabis from 1 to 3. At the same time, there's, of course, a major faction out there that believes, myself included, that cannabis should be completely descheduled. Does weed belong on this 1 through 5 arbitrary system created by the prohibitionist state of the Nixon administration in the 1970s? Mind you, alcohol is not scheduled. Tobacco, nicotine are not scheduled. These are massively deadly substances, cancer-causing substances, and I'm not here to demonize either of them. Just pointing out facts, right? Because without facts, we cannot have a sane conversation. But if alcohol and nicotine tobacco are not scheduled, there is no reason for cannabis, which is significantly safer, has a lower profile of abuse, has a lower addiction rating. There's no reason for cannabis to also not be scheduled. We're talking about plant medicine, something that grows out of the ground. Are there risks? Is there a slight potential for abuse? Absolutely. And we need to be cognizant of that. And nothing I've ever said or done has pretended that this is not without its risks. At the same time, I think we should be descheduling cannabis. The likelihood of that happening is very low, even with a loose cannon like Trump in office, where you just don't know what he's going to do. But of course, the industry is very much looking at who he has appointed to be the head of HHS. Of course, what happens with cannabis and hemp and psychedelics under the leadership of a potential RFK leading the Department of Health and Human Services.
No, it'll definitely be very interesting to see how that all plays out. And I know that's one of the very important stages or changes that hopefully can happen to keep things moving in the direction of just normalizing marijuana and cannabis and allowing it to continue to grow. So let's shift and talk about, I know we were already talking about beverages a little bit, and this is, a non-alcoholic beverage podcast, which includes it's a pretty big tent these days, which makes it fun. I would definitely say that it feels like the cannabis beverages really had a moment in 2024, and mainly thanks to the hemp-derived side, depending on where you live. We're based in the Southeast in Atlanta, where there is not a neighboring state currently that has legalized marijuana. So the only option, to find something that's intoxicating at all with THC would be through the hemp-derived side. And not surprisingly, it's been a pretty big market here, and I think in some of the surrounding states. As you think about some of those changes that, you talked about, that it would be great if those can happen, how much of an impact do you think beverages might have on that, just in terms of maybe helping to normalize it, maybe make it seem a little less scary for people who might just otherwise not have had enough experience with it before?
It's really everything right now. And this conversation is so wild because when you think about it, go back 2 years and ask any regulated market dispensary, what percentage of your sales do cannabis beverages make up? The answer is almost always going to be less than 1%. When you're talking about dispensary channels, people are generally not going there to buy weed in a can or bottle. They are going there to buy gummies. They are going there to buy flour. Flour is the number one selling category. And then you have edibles. And within the edibles, of course, the gummy is king. So that's how cannabis, in terms of the delivery method, has always been. Let's get these cannabinoids and terpenes, THC, let's get that to consumers via the gummy or via the bud or flour. Everything changed with this rise of hemp and with this conversion process where you're taking hemp-derived CBD and mutating it into Delta-9 THC. With doing that, suddenly we were able to create a federally legal option where you could sell in your local supermarket or liquor store to consumers who are curious. And it's like, okay, 2.5 milligrams of THC. I don't know what that means, but I'm going to buy one and take it home. And it has had a profound impact on this market, of course. It's had a negative impact on the regulated market. We're seeing sales continue to go down there, and they've been going down, down, down in most states since the pandemic. But I think the biggest impact here is really the impact on the community, on that total addressable market. Of course, when you look at the group of alcohol consumers and cannabis consumers, alcohol dwarfs that of cannabis, even though we are seeing those numbers and demographics go down. And at the same time, we are seeing skyrocketing usage numbers for weed, primarily because of that hemp channel. And beverages are a massive driver. I think if you were looking at sales statistics from, look at our client's hometown hero in Austin, Texas, doing phenomenal work with products. Some are made with a distillate. They're doing live rosin gummies that I would put up against the best live rosin gummies in the regulated market. They also are doing beverages. And I bet if you ask them, okay, what are two of your top 3 selling SKUs? It's probably a gummy and it's probably a beverage. Beverages are a huge part of this effort. And it's fun too, because of course we are used to drinking our intoxicants. So why shouldn't we drink our cannabis? And we're finally at that stage, going from less than 1% of a regulated market dispensary to now seeing brands building completely outside the regulated market and other brands kind of straddling the two. Our friends over at Cann, our friends over at Keef are in those regulated dispensaries, and they are also in the liquor stores in all of your neighboring states. So it's had a profound impact on normalization. And also, I'm guessing when we look at the usage rates and numbers coming from a lot of the research that's just done on a public health level, we're probably going to see more consistent or regular cannabis consumers in 2024 than we did previous years, purely because the vast availability of these, which is terrific too, because of course, cannabis is a powerful recreational substance. It really can help you take the edge off. At the same time, that same Delta-9 THC in that can of Fable that you're buying in a bar in Tennessee, that same THC is a powerful medicine, as has been agreed upon by so many high-level organizations, And so that's what's really special with this, is it gives us an opportunity to do both. Okay, today I'm consuming for this purpose. Tomorrow I'm consuming for that purpose.
So you talked about earlier you talked about the Civil War in Politico's words, and as far as what's happening between the hemp derived side and the regulated side. So all the things that you've talked about, it certainly seems like there's been a bit of a rift between those two sides, who again are all kind of working around the same plant, but on different sides and kind of operating in their own silos today. And you would, I think, have a better sense of this than we would. It seems like, Florida might be an example where they were trying to legalize recreational marijuana. It was on the ballot in November, actually did get more than 50%, but you have to get to 60 to amend the state constitution there. And, there were definitely reports that folks on the hemp derived side were maybe part of the communication campaign against that. And then on the flip side, maybe a state like California, where Gavin Newsom has, I believe, still prohibited the hemp derived beverage side. And I have to imagine that the regulated side of the market, which has been around and is very strong, in that state, could also have had something to do with that as well. So I guess, do you see a day in the hopefully near future where those come together? And since, it's not just a magic wand that can get waved to have that ultimately be under one tent, so to speak, what are the steps that you see need to happen in order for that to get in order?
Them coming together is absolutely inevitable. And yeah, just to expand briefly on what you just shared, it's like, yeah, there is a full ban on intoxicating hemp in the state of California. Conversations happening with New Jersey Governor Murphy. He's out there saying, okay, you want to sell intoxicating hemp products in my state? Okay, but you have to go through the same regulatory infrastructure of testing that the regulated market products have to go through as well. So we are starting to see this patchwork of laws, regulations be created throughout the country. And that's making it very challenging for a lot of these brands operating in the intoxicating hemp space. In terms of what it's going to take to bring them together, I think it's just going to it's going to take each side giving up something. Because inevitably, if you think of yourself as a regulated cannabis operator, maybe you got your license in Colorado or California 10 years ago. You put your entire life into this dispensary or this brand and your life savings as well. And you are just operating under nearly impossible circumstances because of IRS tax code 280E and a whole host of other boring things I won't get into on this interview. It is really challenging to see somebody then come in and say, oh, okay, well, we're selling basically the same thing, but we're selling it e-com. We're putting it in the mail. We are selling to people in all the states where you can only sell to people in that one state. So what I am hearing too, conversations coming out of both California and DC, is that there are a lot of brands coming together from each side, including many of the brands that I mentioned earlier that are operating in both sides and kind of straddling that fence. They ultimately are coming together and just figuring out how can this work for everybody. And that's a very complicated question in this market. But I think ultimately that's what needs to happen. And I see this happening around the messaging that we just need to federally legalize cannabis, period. It doesn't matter where this came from. It doesn't matter that hemp is in the Farm Bill, but the other cannabis is not. We need to federally legalize cannabis and tear down those walls, because the more that the government regulators can help stop separating hemp and cannabis, which is the same plant, then we can actually move forward with shared initiatives. And in the meantime, I'm just really hoping that cooler heads prevail and that we can find that shared commonality. We can see the potential role that hemp could serve and the potential role that the cannabis market could serve, and eventually merge them into the same, because, it is pretty hypocritical right now with states saying, oh, well, we won't allow this medical or adult use market to exist in a regulated infrastructure. And yet we're going to allow businesses to sell the same products in bars where you're ultimately catching a legal crossfade. It's so wild. I mean, just one aspect of this, in any regulated market, it's illegal to consume cannabis and alcohol on the same premise. It's illegal to even serve them together at the same premise. It's called cross consumption, or in kind of colloquial parlance, it's the crossfade. Yet, go to Minnesota, go to Tennessee, and you can order the beer with the cannabis seltzer, and there it is happening. And of course, the sky is not falling. People have been cross-consuming cannabis and alcohol since time immemorial. It's just kind of silly. So we really need to just get past the bickering and the infighting and really work together to free the plant and to openly increase access to people who need it for either adult use or medicinal purposes.
Right. Hopefully it's inevitable that those two sides come together as one community. And, as a quick follow-up to that, I'd be curious to get your take on this. We obviously talk a lot about just the non-alcoholic category in general on the show. And, would you consider the NA movement, which really is a moderation movement? It's not necessarily people who aren't drinking alcohol at all. Some of them are not, and many of them are actually switching back and forth. Would you consider this movement as a kindred spirit to the greater NA movement?
100%. I think it goes without question that this NA movement exists on its own. But I think part of what has driven its success is the increasing availability of intoxicating cannabis beverages. Sure, there are a lot of people out there who don't need to take the edge off or don't need to find that altered state. But many people who have contemplated, hey, maybe I should drink less. I know that would be better for my health, my weight management, whatever it might be. They still want to have some sort of an effect. They want to catch some kind of a buzz. It's like, my friend and colleague, Ben Kennedy from Fable, he makes these gorgeous canned cocktails with hemp-derived THC in them. They, first and foremost, they're just a stunning cocktail. But secondarily, they still let you take the edge off. They still let you catch a buzz. And frankly, that is something that a lot of people are still looking for, especially as they're looking at these figures and statistics of the NA movement spreading and gaining steam. And they're like, I would do that if there was an alternative. And now that's what we see. There is an alternative. So many moms in my neighborhood right here in Denver, Colorado, or they're looking for, okay, well, I have 2 glasses of wine every night. What's replacing that? I think so often with consumers, it's not really an option unless you give them that legitimate replacement that gives them some of the joy or the effects that they're ultimately looking for from the initial product. And here we are, here it is. And guess what? This is a non-toxic plant. Worth reminding. Of course, you and I were talking about the U.S. Surgeon General's warnings on alcohol right before the show. That's very real. I mean, alcohol is a cancer-causing product. There's no way to work your way around that. Of course, research says that there's no safe amount of alcohol to have on a daily basis. And again, not demonizing that substance, because I'm here to free substances instead of that. But when we're talking about cannabis, this is a non-toxic plant. Again, it has its risks, low addictive ratings, whatever, but this is a non-toxic plant, impossible to overdose. So what a phenomenal and compelling alternative for those contemplating an NA lifestyle, or even just moderation, scaling back a little bit. I love the term Cali sober. Hey, I don't really drink, but I do consume cannabis, and that's really taking hold far beyond the boundaries of California these days.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned Ben Kennedy earlier. We really enjoyed having him on our show, I think 3 or 4 episodes ago. We'll, for those who didn't listen, we'll put a link to that in the show notes, his brand Fable Libations. And speaking of that, so as we start to wrap things up here, I know Grasslands has been recognized for the work that you guys do in the space. You were just, I think, named PR Agency of the Year at the MJs, which are the International Cannabis Awards. So congrats again for that. I think that was your second year in a row, maybe winning that. Is that right?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. We were really proud to bring that award home last month.
Excellent. And I know many of your clients are also making headlines and being recognized for their work as well. Are there any, I know you don't want to single people out, but at the same time, is there anything you would like to mention, or just, what are some of the things you're most proud of in terms of things that they're working on?
I mean, you got to love all the clients, of course. I already mentioned Fable and these gorgeous canned cocktails. I would highly recommend anybody who's interested in this NA beverage space check out Hometown Hero as well, what they have going on. But in general, I just love helping these bold brands find their audiences through PR, thought leadership, and marketing. That's really what we specialize in. I think back to a couple of the big wins. Just last year, we had our longtime clients at Cookies, one of the largest cannabis brands in the world. We had them in a 3,500 word feature in the New York Times Magazine. That feature ended up being repurposed by the editors at the Times for the Sunday long read episode of the Daily. It was all about selling cannabis like you sell streetwear, and focused on Cookies' super fascinating CEO, Berner, who's a rapper and an entrepreneur. We had him on the cover of Forbes a couple of years ago, but I think it's really when we secure those meaningful placements for clients that really gets us going. When last month Forbes magazine comes out and says, hey, here's the best cannabis beverages on the market, THC beverages on the market, and Fable is at the top of that list, it doesn't surprise me whatsoever. You taste what's coming out of different canning lines, and you know that not all of these beverages are created equally. What Ben's done is phenomenal. And so I think we just love positioning our clients in front of those audiences.
So what would you say is next for Grasslands? And, as all these changes hopefully, start to take place that we were talking about, what role do you see yourselves playing as this movement toward either hopefully at some point federal legalization, or the two factions of the category kind of coming together? How do you guys, or what role do you see yourselves playing, not just as a PR agency, obviously, but just in the overall education of the space?
Yeah, I think on one side, we are, of course, those communicators, but more importantly, the normalizers. Going back a few years when I was the cannabis editor at the Denver Post. So I was a full-time journalist reporting on the implementation of the world's first regulated cannabis market. I had a lot of people approach me in those 3.5 years telling me, Ricardo, you are changing everything for weed forever. You're changing how journalists cover this. And, I'm just like head down 60, 70 hours a week and saying, okay, sure. Yeah. All I was doing is reporting on my beat. What I didn't realize at the time, and what distance has allowed me to understand, is that I technically was changing things substantially. For example, like the Brookings Institution back in 2015 said that I was one of the most influential people in global cannabis purely because I was treating this industry as a legitimate industry, which it is, at scale. I was writing about cannabis in the Post. That journalism was being repurposed by the Associated Press in thousands of other media outlets. And by just treating it as a normal industry, I was helping to normalize it then. And now in this new incarnation, and mind you, as a journalist, it wasn't my goal to normalize cannabis. I was just reporting on the implementation of the regulated market for my readers. It was just a byproduct. But now it is very much my goal to normalize weed, to normalize hemp, to normalize THC and these cannabinoids and terpenes that ultimately make up these magical effects and make this such a powerful adult use tool, such a fun recreational substance, and such a powerful medicine. So I think we're going to continue doing more of that. Our tagline is, we tell stories, build brands, and amplify value. So yeah, we're going to tell more stories about the compelling brands that we work with across CPG. That's traditional soft drinks. That's NA. That's alcohol. We represent alcohol brands. Of course, that's cannabis and psychedelics. We're going to continue evolving as CPG continues to look differently. And, you mentioned the policy stuff that I've been doing. We just rolled out in Colorado the world's second of its kind infrastructure for a legal therapeutic psychedelic environment. And really proud of the work that I've done with my colleague on the Natural Medicine Advisory Board. Colorado Governor Jared Polis appointed 15 of us about a year and a half ago to do this important work. And that application structure just rolled out in the last 3 weeks. You can now go apply to grow mushrooms, to be a facilitator, to have a care center. So we're standing up an entirely new environment that also kind of exists in and around this NA beverage space, but also goes significantly deeper into the future of mental health, because of course we're seeing what some of these early clinical trials mean with everything from LSD and MDMA to more naturals like ibogaine and psilocybin mushrooms. So that's what I plan on keep doing. I'm going to normalize it all and tell the stories to really help position our clients in front of their most urgent audiences.
Well, Ricardo, we really appreciate you taking the time with us. We appreciate all the work that you and your team are doing there and all the things that we were talking about. And yeah, I can't think of a corner of the non-alcoholic universe that is moving maybe as quickly as the cannabis marijuana side, just with, both from a regulation standpoint but also just in terms of new products that are hitting the market, which feels like it's happening just about every day. So really appreciate you coming on to explain all of this for us.
Oh gosh, thank you again for having me, and thanks for doing what you do.
All right. I want to again thank Ricardo for his time. This episode reminded us of last season when we spoke to Brian Crawford, CEO of the Beer Institute, who gave us insights on the NA beer category from the lobbying side of the fence. I think connecting with people like that from time to time who are so networked in the space can provide some perspective beyond a single brand or company. Anyways, we continue rolling through our second season with some really good episodes ahead. You'll just have to trust me on that for now. And until then, cheers.